Is Cartagena really as bad as some people say it is? Hi all, I'm Ezrado and you're watching my travel channel where I talk all things Colombia. Today's video might be the most subjective one I've done yet, as I wanted to tell you all why I personally believe that Cartagena gets more of a bad rap from people than it deserves. So this wasn't something I was fully aware of up until recently, but I've noticed that Cartagena seems to get a lot of criticism from tourists. For instance, I remember towards the end of my last trip to Colombia, I was on Monserrate and I overheard these guys from the US next to me, probably in their 20s or 30s, and they were saying how much they loved every city in Colombia that they visited, except for Cartagena. And that just struck me as really strange, because I'd been to Cartagena a few months earlier and it ended up being probably one of the most enjoyable cities for me. In fact, a few weeks back I did a video on my top 5 Colombian cities to visit, and in that video I ranked Cartagena as number 1. So for a while I was wondering whether I heard these guys right or if I missed some context in their conversation. I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand that we can have different opinions on these things, but Cartagena really was a high point in my last trip, so it just felt kind of strange to hear someone say it was the one city they didn't like. Since then though, I've noticed a handful of people on the internet speaking out against Cartagena too. I even had someone comment on one of my videos a while back saying that they'd been somewhat dissuaded from visiting because they'd also seen a bunch of criticism about it online. So I figured that if this is the mainstream narrative being offered by expat YouTubers and vloggers, I'll play the role of the nonconformist here, as I genuinely think Cartagena is an amazing city to visit. Now, from everything I've heard, the common criticisms seem to boil down to two main issues people have with the city. The first one is that it's super touristy, and the second is that there are too many street vendors who are overly persistent. So I thought I'd weigh in on both of these criticisms and give you some reasons why I don't think they should deter you from visiting. Okay, so starting with the critique that there's too many tourists, this is an interesting one to me, as I think this probably says more about the people making this criticism than it does about the city itself. And I know it sounds like I'm throwing shade in saying that, but I promise I'm not. It's just more of an observation. I think if this is the prime reason why you didn't like Cartagena, then chances are you probably really hate tourists. Now, I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong. Like, if your preference is avoiding tourists like the plague, then, well, I can't argue with that. I guess what I have a problem with, though, is when people start treating these opinions like gospel. I mean, I'll be the first to say that I have some negative opinions about a certain Colombian city that shouldn't deter you from visiting and checking it out, because you might think totally different of it. The same goes to the people who complain about Cartagena, and the criticism of there being too many tourists in particular is frankly, in my opinion, a dumb reason to completely neglect it without a second thought. If you're thinking of living there, then yeah, things like this might hold more weight, but if you're just visiting for a few days, I really don't think this is a good reason to deter most people, unless you're going on a vacation specifically to be isolated from people, and this is the most important thing to you. For most people though, the reason I don't think you should be deterred is because the colonial parts of the city are just so incredible. Seeing all these grandiose, colourful Caribbean buildings from as early as the 16th century that are still intact, it's honestly just awe-inspiring to see it in person. And so many of these buildings all played an important role in the country's history, like you have the Palace of the Inquisition, the Bovedas, which were used as dungeons in the Wars of Independence, the amazing stone church of San Pedro Claver, and the San Felipe Castle, which was used in battles against pirates and is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Seeing all of these historical Caribbean sites in person was just so surreal to me. Like, the first time I set foot in the walled colonial city, it just hit me, like, I just traveled through time, I am walking through a 16th century colonial city, and it's all here, right in front of me. So I think you can understand now why it frustrates me somewhat when people just say, don't go there because it's too touristy. Like, you're seriously gonna sacrifice seeing all this incredible history, stepping back in time and having the most visceral experience of colonial Colombia as you walk through World Heritage, just because you don't like tourists. Now look, I stand by what I said earlier about how we're all entitled to our preferences, but I can at least say I personally really dislike this sentiment. As I said, I think for someone to just blanketly say that Cartagena sucks just because they didn't like the touristy vibe, it's kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Even if the touristy stuff was annoying, I think it's important to not disregard all historical stuff I just mentioned, and for many, including myself, the weight of this aspect strongly overrides any potential annoyance from tourists. I mean, it's the same for anything really. Like, if I want to go to see Chichen Itza in Mexico, for example, it's because I want to be wowed by seeing an ancient city, and I want to see that whether there are tourists there or not. It might be nicer without tourists, but at the end of the day, it's not going to deter me from going to that site, as the novelty of seeing an ancient city is much more important to me than avoiding tourists. So I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to say here, but I do want to mention too that even just looking at the validity of this criticism, I really think it's a bit overstated. Like, yeah, you'll probably see more tourists in Cartagena than you will anywhere else in Colombia, but it rarely poses an issue in terms of being able to see and experience things. There's a few places, I guess, where you'll be waiting in line, but for most of it, you can really just walk around freely and not be affected by anyone. I mean, you could argue that tourists ruin the vibe, but even then, I gotta say that there really wasn't enough density of tourists for it to tarnish my experience in any way. So yeah, in summary, if you really hate tourists, then that's ultimately your choice, and you don't have to go to Cartagena. But unless you absolutely loathe tourists, I don't think this should be enough of a reason to deter you. I really don't like being around tourists either, but again, if I'm just in a place for a few days that's as incredible as Cartagena, the novelty of seeing the amazing buildings and structures heavily outweighs any dislike of tourists. Moving on to the second common criticism about aggressive street vendors though, I was going to go into depth on this as well, but then I realized that it's pretty much the same story as what I was just saying about tourists. Again, they might be annoying, but are they so annoying that you should avoid Cartagena altogether and avoid seeing all the amazing historical sites? I would argue not. I'll also say again that I think this criticism is also a bit overstated. Yes, there are persistent street vendors in touristy areas, but after visiting Rio Hacha and Santa Marta, I honestly think this is more of a cultural thing on the Caribbean coast. I never really found the vendors in Cartagena to be any more forthright than the vendors in those cities, and they were infrequent enough to not tarnish my visit in any major way. Like, I was in Cartagena for about a week, and I can really only remember one instance where a vendor was overly persistent with me. So yeah, really not enough to ruin my trip. With all of this being said, I think the deeper reason why it bothers me when expats so flippantly disregard Cartagena like this is because they're not really looking at it in the way they're meant to. It's a pet peeve I have, but I noticed that so many expats that come to Colombia have very little interest in fully immersing themselves in the culture. Like, the amount of people you hear about who just go to Medellin, and if you would ask them what about Colombia actually interests them, their answer is usually some form of...
It's just the vibe of it. It's the vibe, and no, that's it, it's the vibe. I rest my case.
If they do mention anything though, it's usually superficial things like how hot the women are, or the party scene, or even just it's cheap. And whilst these things certainly exist in Colombia, it frustrates me when people are just eternally transfixed on them and never look beyond these things into anything else. I think if you're integrating yourself into a country, you really ought to look beyond indulging yourself in immediate hedonistic impulses. It's like you're going to this country that has a rich, complex, and fascinating history, and a huge amount of cultural diversity across its regions. There are so many things you could immerse yourself in, like learning about the variety of traditional music genres in each region, for instance, or getting familiar with the country's famous literary genre by reading some Gabriel Garcia Marquez, or, as I said before, actually trying to learn about Colombia's history to better understand the context of why things are the way they are today. Pick up some history books, pay attention to what you're seeing and reading at museums, learn a bit about the country's diverse flora and fauna. All of these things, to me, what truly constitute immersing yourself in a country fully. It's about moving past your immediate wants and desires and devoting some time to actively educating yourself about the place. To wrap this back around to Cartagena, this is really where my frustration comes from. If you're an expat who's spending a good amount of time in Colombia, you shouldn't just see a city for how it immediately makes you feel, but as a cultural learning experience. If you're constantly chasing the vibe wherever you go, you're not exactly going to be growing as a person. I honestly believe that true growth comes when we embrace something new that's outside of our comfort zone, instead of just going after the things we're familiar with to gratify us. So when it comes to Cartagena, that means looking beyond the things you don't like the tourism or the street vendors, and actually seeking out the learning experience to be had. Namely, the entire freaking 1600 city for you to explore. Now, as I said before, I'll grant you, if you're just coming to Colombia for a quick holiday and you're not actually invested in the country all that much, but you're just looking for a brief getaway from your home country to relax for a little while, then fine. I'm not saying every single person who visits has to immerse themselves to this level. If you're staying there longer term though, I really think it's in your best interest to not just be some frat boy Chad who only ever pursues hedonism and gives gringos a bad name amongst Colombians, only caring about some tiny superficial subset of Colombian culture and ignores everything else, much less criticizes it when it doesn't fulfill their immediate impulses. In the context of cities, I understand that you want to be picky when you're looking for a place to live, but in terms of just visiting a city, at least if you're a long-term expat, I think you should move beyond the vibe. Anyway, that turned into quite a rant, but I'm glad I got that off my chest. Thanks for watching all this way, and if you want to see more videos about Colombia, which I promise for the most part won't just be me venting, like, subscribe, bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!